Last year was insane for indie games, but most people only played the same 5 titles everyone talked about. Meanwhile, dozens of incredible games slipped through the cracks. No massive marketing, no viral trailers, just genuinely great experiences that deserved way more attention. If you're tired of hearing about the same indies on every list, these probably pass you by and absolutely shouldn't have. Silly Polly Beast is chaos wrapped in a deceptively rough art style. But don't let the silly name fool you. This is a brutal survival horror shooter with a punk rock soul. It doesn't play like a physics sandbox. It plays like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, dropped into a red and black sketchbook nightmare. Actually, this is very reminiscent of Parasite Eve. You play as Polly, fighting for freedom with a diverse arsenal that includes a skateboard for melee attacks and scarce ammunition for your guns. The game thrives on tension and style. The fixed camera angles and limited resources force you to make desperate decisions in combat, while the narrative shifts perspectives and genres to reflect Polly's unstable mental state. It's gritty, loud, and visually stunning in a way that feels like an angry comic book come alive. The skateboard isn't just a gimmick. It's your lifeline when ammo runs dry, letting you bash demons in a way that feels uniquely aggressive for a horror game. But the same aggression that makes it fun also makes it frustrating. The difficulty is steep, with punishing checkpoints and bosses that demand near perfection. Some players might find the resource scarcity maddening rather than frightening, and the rough aesthetic extends to some clunky collision moments. Even so, Silly Polly Beast stands out because it has an undeniable identity. It's raw, unapologetic, and overflowing with personality. A true hidden gem for horror fans tired of the same old polished scares. Effulgence is easily one of the most visually distinct indies of the year. A party-based RPG rendered entirely in ASCII art. It's not a real-time adventure with light beams. It's a turn-based tactical game where the world, the characters, and the monsters are all built from cascading letters and symbols. The result is a sci-fi world that looks like it's bleeding out of a 1980s terminal, glowing with a retro-futuristic effulgence. The core mechanic is incredibly unique. Enemies are resources. When you defeat aliens and monsters, you don't just get XP. You break them down into their atomic raw parts and feed them into a 3D printer to craft new weapons and gear mid-run. It creates a satisfying loop of destruction and creation. You navigate a 3D world map, manage a squad, and engage in battles where you have to balance your ammo and durability against the resources you'll gain from the kill. But its beauty comes with caveats. The text-heavy visuals can be hard to parse during chaotic moments, leading to symbol soup, where it's tough to tell a wall from an enemy. It's also a shorter experience designed for replayability rather than a 50-hour epic, which might leave some RPG fans wanting more depth. However, Effulgence stands tall because it commits 100% to its aesthetic. It's the kind of indie that defines itself through a singular, bold vision, delivering a tactical experience that feels genuinely alien. Alright, let's dive into Dragon is Dead. Picture a pixel-perfect roguelite that marries Dead Cell's lightning-fast combat with Diablo's sweet loot pinch, then drops you into a gritty 2D castle crawl. It left early access on June 6th, after a year of community-driven tweaks. Think UI polish, combat balance, and a final chapter tease by PM Studios and Team Sunny. I slotted it here because while it never grabbed the spotlight, it quietly hooked a dedicated few with its gear-on-death twist and feral synergy builds. There were some early translation hiccups and a skeletal narrative. After launch, the vibe settled into solid but niche, with praise for fluid dodge frames and mythic tier loot offsets to grumbles about repeating runes and text-heavy lore. And there's also deep artifact synergies that let you craft wildly varied builds. They've trimmed the fat, sharpened the combat, and added a feral new heroine, mythic tier loot, a quenching upgrade system, and 16 tiers of nightmare in-game challenges. Is it perfect? No. But beneath that gritty pixel skin beats a roguelite heart that refuses to give up. Pale Coins is one of those quiet, atmospheric indies that sneaks up on you. It's a handcrafted open-world action RPG that blends the top-down perspective of classic Zelda with the punishing weight of a Souls-like. The game leans into a moody, old-school fantasy aesthetic with what I would call restrained pixel art. The sharp black outlines and muted colors that make every dungeon and forest feel ancient and dangerous. The gameplay blends methodical exploration with deliberate combat. You aren't just mashing buttons. You're managing stamina, reading enemy patterns, and positioning yourself to avoid being overwhelmed by swarms of insects or charging ogres. It proudly adopts a no-hand-holding philosophy, dropping you into the kingdom of Grenmark with little direction other than to find the fabled champion's coins. The progression is driven by loot and a fairly substantial equipment system where armor and weapons drastically change your playstyle, from heavy melee crushing to mana-restricted magic. But its old-school sensibilities can be a double-edged sword. The lack of direction can lead to genuine confusion, and the combat, while tactical, can feel stiff or basic in the early hours before your build comes together. Some quality-of-life features are intentionally missing to preserve friction, which might frustrate some players. Still, Pale Coins delivers a rare sense of discovery and danger, perfect for those who miss the era when fantasy games trusted you to get lost and find your own way out. Tavern Keeper is one of the most charming, personality-driven management sims to drop in 2025, and it has quickly become a quiet favorite among players who love creativity and controlled chaos. From the moment you take over your first shabby little tavern, the game pulls you into a warm, comedic world full of mischievous patrons, unpredictable events, and systems that feel both cozy and surprisingly deep. Unlike many management games that flatten their world into pure numbers, Tavern Keeper gives every character quirks and histories that ripple through your establishment. Drunks who start brawls, adventurers bragging about quests, traveling merchants who leave gossip behind. The tavern itself becomes a stage full of personality. The art direction leans into stylized medieval whimsy, thick outlines, exaggerated animations, and colors that make every room feel alive. As your business grows, you expand kitchens, decorate dining halls, add bizarre entertainment options, and manage increasingly chaotic staff who might steal from you if they're unhappy or accidentally burn the place down if they're incompetent. Every system connects to another: reputation, cleanliness, food quality, customer mood, town politics, creating this layering effect where success feels earned, not automated. But it's definitely not without flaws. Some players notice the mid-game pacing slows down, with long stretches of waiting for resources or coin to accumulate. AI pathfinding can occasionally drive you insane, especially when customers clog hallways or employees prioritize baffling tasks. And while the game has plenty of charm, the narrative elements can feel thin for players expecting a story-rich experience. A few balancing issues still linger too, allowing certain strategies to dominate while others feel underbaked. Despite those rough edges, Tavern Keeper excels because it delivers a world that feels alive, not through cinematic cutscenes or heavy lore dumps, but through tiny interactions and emergent storytelling. It's the kind of game where you look back at your messy, overcrowded tavern and realize every disaster, every triumph, and every drunken brawl helped shape a story that was completely your own. For fans of creative management games and cozy chaos, this is easily one of 2025's best hidden gems. Garden of Witches might be the cozy chaos you didn't know you needed. Released in early access on May 25th, this one comes from Team Tapas, the folks behind Bistro Heroes and A Girl Adrift. And it's got that same hand-drawn charm, but now wrapped around a fast-paced action loop with a surprisingly emotional core. You play as Syl, who's basically the only one in her coven willing to clean up the mess left by a bunch of lazy witches. The garden's falling apart, and the only way to fix it? Beat the others into attending a magical tea party. I included this one because it's got heart. It's not just another Hades-like. It's a roguelike that leans into narrative without sacrificing gameplay. Each run lets you experiment with scissors-based melee, spell combos, and relic synergies that feel genuinely strategic. The synergy system is wild. You can stack effects like burning, summoning crows, or triggering buffs mid-dash, and it rewards creativity more than brute force. The game's 5 chapters are already live, and while the devs promise more in-game content later this year, what's here already feels like a full experience. Post-launch, the sentiment's been overwhelmingly positive, with players loving the expressive character portraits, jazzy soundtrack, and the way each boss has a distinct personality and combat style. The devs have been super responsive, even teasing a card-based stat system and side missions in the 7.0 update. The melee feels a bit clunky compared to spell builds, and the dash cooldown can make boss fights feel punishing unless you luck into the right evasion spell. You can feel the DNA of Team Topaz's earlier games. Quirky characters, soft world building, and a love for cozy aesthetics. If you're looking for a game that blends charm, challenge, and a little bit of witchy weirdness, this one's worth planting in your library. Into Evil is a stylish, grim, fast-paced descent into darkness. The kind of indie that feels like someone distilled every cool moment from a dark fantasy anime and stitched them into a playable nightmare. It uses high-contrast visuals and sharp silhouettes to create a world that feels both ancient and aggressive. Think ritual altars lit by flickering crimson, monstrous silhouettes sliding through candlelit ruins, and combat arenas shaped like sacrificial chambers. The visual direction alone tells a story of corruption and pressure, like something is always crawling just behind you. Gameplay-wise, it blends action RPG combat with roguelite structure, making every run feel tense and forcing improvisation. Enemies hit hard, dodge windows are tight, and the game expects you to master its rhythm rather than button mash your way out. Builds revolve around cursed relics, Bloodborne-style risk mechanics, and powerful abilities that always seem to come with a cost. It has that addictive loop where one more run turns into 10 more, because you're constantly chasing a deeper understanding of the game's brutal systems. But the roguelite foundation means it also inherits that genre's pain points. Difficulty can spike brutally depending on early game item RNG. Some relic combinations feel unbalanced, pushing players into repetitive strategies. The story, while atmospheric, is delivered in fragmented pieces that require effort to piece together, which may frustrate players looking for a more structured narrative. And like many early indie roguelikes, a few animations feel slightly stiff, especially during hectic encounters. Even with its rough edges, Into Evil succeeds because it leans fully into its aesthetic and mechanical identity. It's stylish, challenging, and drenched in mood, offering a level of atmosphere many bigger budget games struggle to achieve. If you enjoy dark fantasy worlds, skill-based combat, this is one of the strongest indie hidden gems of the year. Next up on our underrated list is Peripetia, a cyberpunk immersive sim that quietly slipped into early access on February 21st. Picture Deus Ex meets Ghost in the Shell. Set in a post-Soviet Poland where you play Marie, a cryo-awoken cyborg mercenary trying to carve out a living amid propaganda broadcasts and gas mask thugs. You'll climb neon-soaked rooftops, hack terminals, interrogate informants, and choose between stealth, brute force, or creative problem-solving to complete your contracts. I had to include Peripetia because it's exactly the kind of ambitious indie that flew under most radars. Players praised its razor-sharp world building and tight systems, manual ammo loading, grid-based inventory, sliding tile hacking puzzles, and a brutalist architecture that oozes atmosphere. The twist? All that micromanagement actually feels immersive once you lean into it. It wasn't all roses. Early adopters flagged janky ladder climbs, occasional AI hiccups in firefights, and a UI that mixes cartoon-style augmentation icons with retro Soviet overlays. But the team's been quick to patch in better tutorials, controller support, and crash fixes, turning what felt rough around the edges in February into something far more polished today. They swapped narrative handholding for emergent storytelling. Your decisions carry weight, whether you rescue a broken Android keeper or help a cult of hackers sabotage PSR broadcasts. It's a lean, interactive sim that rewards patience. If you're hungry for a game that trusts you to juggle cyber augmentations, plan each reload, and carve your own path through hostile territory, Peripetia is the underdog 2025 gym you need to play. Rue Valley is a quietly unnerving experience, a narrative-driven exploration game wrapped in the aesthetic of a vintage, dreamlike mystery. The world looks like it was painted using soft pastels and foggy ink, creating environments that feel both beautiful and unsettling. Streets bend at impossible angles. Homes sit abandoned with half-finished meals still on the tables, and the valley itself feels suspended in time, like the moment before a storm that never comes. It's the kind of game that doesn't need jump scares to be frightening. The atmosphere alone does the heavy lifting. Gameplay revolves around uncovering what happened to the valley's missing residents. You explore houses, dig through journals, interpret cryptic notes, and interact with strange relics that hint at supernatural forces lurking beneath the town's history. Every clue feels deliberately placed, and the pacing is calm but heavy. The game knows exactly how to let silence make you uneasy. There are light puzzle elements, environmental storytelling, and occasional moments where reality subtly distorts, making you question whether the valley is haunted, cursed, or simply broken by something unseen. But its biggest strength, its quiet subtlety, is also where some players run into frustration. The game rarely explains itself directly, which can lead to moments of wandering without clear objectives. A few puzzles rely more on intuition than logic, leading to trial and error frustration. Its slow pacing may feel too passive for gamers expecting action or clear progression checkpoints. And some critics noted that the ending, while thematically strong, leaves certain plot threads intentionally ambiguous. Even so, Rue Valley remains one of the most distinctive indie releases of the year. It's intimate, atmospheric, and rich with that unsettling beauty only smaller studios seem to pull off anymore. For players who enjoy narrative mysteries, psychological tension, and environments that tell their own stories, Rue Valley is easily one of 2025's most overlooked treasures. Next up on our underrated roster is Blade Chimera, Team Ladybug's first fully original Metroidvania, which quietly launched January 16th, 2025 on Steam and Switch. You step into the boots of Shin, a memory-wiped demon hunter, partnered with Lux the Living Sword, tearing through a neon-soaked, cyberpunk Osaka overrun by yokai. It looks and feels like Symphony of the Night's spiritual successor, yet it's stamped with Ladybug's own pixel-perfect flair and ruthless combat loop. I shoved this one into must-play territory because, despite glowing Steam reviews and a killer demo at Next Fest, it barely cut through the noise of early 25 blockbusters. The buzz has been almost unanimously positive. Folks can't stop raving about the crunchy combat, that warp-anywhere fast travel, and multi-phase Titan boss encounters that feel like boss fights X10. Critics love the dynamic music shifts and the way every weapon swap mid-run actually matters. On the flip side, some call out its 8-hour runtime, a plot that leans light on character beats, and a spike around the mid-game where one-shot laser walls will humble you. If you missed it, stick a pin in your wish list. Blade Chimera's blend of pixel artistry, fluid demon slaying, and sweet fast travel makes it the underdog Metroidvania of 2025 you can't afford to sleep on. The Drifter is one of 2025's sharpest indie thrillers, a grim, fast-moving story wrapped in gritty pixel art and drenched in paranoia. You play a drifter who witnesses a violent murder and gets pulled into a conspiracy that keeps twisting long after you think you understand what's happening. The tone is pure retro noir. Rain-slicked streets, grimy motels, flickering neon, and conversations that feel like everyone's hiding something. It's stylish without being pretentious, and the tension never lets up. What makes it stand out is how it blends grounded crime drama with sudden, unnerving supernatural shifts. Reality bends at the edges. Voices echo where they shouldn't, memories fracture, and the game uses these moments sparingly enough that everyone hits hard. Dialogue is sharp, pacing is tight, and the whole experience feels like a cult thriller you stumble upon late at night and can't turn off. Even the animations carry weight. Punches land brutally, chases feel desperate, and the protagonist's exhaustion becomes part of the atmosphere. It's not perfect. Some puzzle moments lean a bit too much on trial and error, and the linear structure means players looking for branching choices won't find them. A few transitions happen so fast they can feel disorienting, especially near the end. But those rough edges almost add to the game's scrappy charm. It's messy in the same way the world it portrays is messy. The Drifter ends up being one of the year's strongest hidden gems because it knows exactly what it wants to be: a tight, stylish, unsettling noir mystery with just enough strange energy to keep you guessing. If you like tense narratives, grim atmosphere, and stories that refuse to play safe, this is an indie you don't want to overlook. If you've ever wanted to feel like your brain was being split in half, in the best way possible, Ambidextro delivers that experience with style. Released on March 28th, this precision platformer allows you to control two characters at once, one with each hand. Sounds simple, right? Until you realize your left thumb is trying to dodge spikes while your right is solving a mirrored puzzle under a time limit. It's like playing co-op with yourself and somehow still arguing over who messed up. I included Ambidextro because it's one of those rare indies that takes a gimmick and turns it into a full-blown gameplay philosophy. 100 levels of increasingly brutal single-screen challenges that test your coordination, timing, and ability to not rage quit when your fingers betray you. Steam reviews hit overwhelmingly positive, with players praising the minimalist design, dungeon synth soundtrack, and the sheer satisfaction of nailing a perfect run. Ambidextro is tighter, meaner, and way more focused on mechanical mastery. The devs clearly learned from past experiments and doubled down on what works: short levels, snappy resets, and a control scheme that makes you feel like a wizard or a klutz depending on the moment. Some players found the difficulty curve a bit steep, especially around level 30, when the game starts demanding near-perfect sync. The lack of accessibility options also raised eyebrows. If you got motor limitations, this one's a tough sell. But for those who thrive on challenge, it's a brain workout worth sweating through. If you're looking for an indie that'll make you question your hand-eye coordination and maybe your life choices, Ambidextro is the one to try. Easy Delivery Co. looks like a cozy parcel delivery sim on the surface, but underneath the cute exterior is one of the most unexpectedly addicting physics-driven games of 2025. Its art style leans into the PS1 style with a retro aesthetic and vibe, giving every town and environment this charming handmade feel, like a toy set come to life. Buildings wobble slightly when bumped, vehicles bounce as if filled with springs, and characters animate with exaggerated, almost slapstick energy. That visual softness disguises a layer of mechanical depth that only reveals itself once the deliveries start getting complicated. The fun comes from how the game treats physics as both the challenge and the joke. Packages slide, swing, tumble, and ricochet off objects with delightful unpredictability. Roads tilt unexpectedly, bridges sway, and windy areas can send fragile parcels cartwheeling into rivers if you're careless. Managing momentum becomes an art form. Every slope, turn, and bump calls for improvisation. The game's sense of humor shines through environmental storytelling, quirky townsfolk, bizarre package requests, and delivery routes that look straightforward until something ridiculous happens. But easy delivery isn't flawless. The physics, while charming, can sometimes become chaotic in ways that don't feel entirely fair. Controls occasionally struggle to keep up with the game's more complex setups, especially when vehicles start stacking upgrade effects. Some players report camera frustration in tight areas where objects obscure what's coming next. And while the progression system is fun, more variety in late-game delivery would have kept things fresh. Still, its charm is irresistible. Few games capture the joy of simple tasks going horribly and hilariously wrong quite like this one. It's playful, imaginative, and consistently surprising. It's an indie gems that sneaks up on you with far more personality than you expect from a laid-back delivery game. If you ever wanted to play a retro shooter that feels like Marathon got dunked in a vat of Evangelion and then handed a tactical gun manual, Beyond Citadel is your fever dream come true. Released in January 2025, this sequel to the Citadel doesn't just build on its predecessor. It goes full cyberpunk apocalypse and asks you to shoot your way through it with a carbine that jams if you don't treat it right. You play as the Martyr, a clone soldier sent to dismantle the trumpeters of the apocalypse, who've turned Earth into a biomechanical wasteland. You can lean around corners and manually eject magazines like a gun nerd's fantasy. I included this one because it's not just underrated, but beneath the shock factor is some of the most satisfying tactical gunplay I've seen in an indie shooter. You're not just blasting enemies. You're managing oxygen levels, manually cycling bolts, and praying your magazine didn't break mid-fight. Post-launch, it hit overwhelmingly positive on Steam, topping the new and trending charts. Players praised the weapon handling, level design, and the sheer scale. Critics loved the pacing and combat rhythm, though flagged the final act's movement gimmick as awkward. The translation's a bit janky, and the story's cryptic unless you're deep into the lore rabbit hole. But that's part of the charm. Compared to the Citadel, this is a massive upgrade. The environments are bigger, the combat tighter, and the narrative more ambitious, even if it occasionally trips over its own philosophical monologue. But the dev, Dokromori, has been transparent about his inspirations, from Ghost in the Shell to Blame. If you're into shooters that make you feel like a tactical god one moment and a confused clone the next, Beyond Citadel is a must-play. Ovis Loop is one of those indies that immediately hooks you with its premise before you even understand the mechanics. It's not the surreal, narrative-focused indie game you might expect from its pixel cyberpunk aesthetic, but a high-octane action roguelite that feels like a fever dream collision between Dead Cells and Slay the Spire. You play as Omega, a sheep armed with massive weaponry, greatswords, guns, and electric rapiers, fighting against a legion of robotic wolves in a post-apocalyptic retelling of the classic fable. The core loop revolves around frantic, wave-based combat and deep build customization. Instead of just finding loot, you slot skills into an intricate upgrade system where active abilities can be chained with passive buffs, allowing for wild synergies like summoning drone swarms or triggering lightning strikes on every hit. The visuals are striking, detailed pixel art enhanced by dynamic glitch effects that bend and break the screen, reinforcing the simulation gone wrong vibe. It demands quick reflexes and strategic planning, rewarding players who can master its rhythm of dodging and punishing aggression. But Ovis Loop isn't easy to recommend universally. The difficulty curve is punishing right out of the gate, with bosses that feel like steep walls for newcomers. Some sprite work, while stylish, can be hard to read in the chaos of battle, leading to cheap hits. However, if you crave a roguelite that trades generic fantasy for a stylish, glitch-hop action spectacle where a sheep creates absolute carnage, this is a hidden gem that refuses to play it safe. Guns of Fury, the two-person passion project that quietly hit Steam and Switchback in February 2025 and still feels criminally overlooked. Picture Metal Slug's bullet hell, run-and-gun fused with a sprawling Metroidvania map, all wrapped in gorgeous 16-bit pixel art and backed by an 80s synth rock soundtrack from Dominic Nienmark. You step into the combat boots of Vincent Fury, a special operative on a mission to rescue the kidnapped Dr. Klaus, recover the world-saving Tetris cell, and blow up every corporate goon standing in your way. I slotted this one onto my underrated list because it's exactly the kind of indie gem that delivers big thrills without a billboard. Early patches threw in a late-game teleporter item, color-coded maps, and clear NPC hints to ease the backtracking grind. The April update even trimmed some boss health and rebalanced accessories after folks called out weird difficulty spikes around the Foundry. Praise always lands on that addictive boss design. I've never seen an 8-bit machine gun fight feel this cinematic, and the sheer joy of uncovering breakable shortcuts. The original fast travel points were miles apart, literally, and the UI could feel clunky when you're juggling 8 weapon types and 50 unlockables. Still, every patch has made the journey smoother without dulling the challenge. If you're hunting an indie that marries retro thrills with modern Metroidvania depth, Guns of Fury is one you'll want to carve into your backlog. Just don't be surprised when you lose a weekend chasing that last secret weapon. Eric Schoen, The Stolen Dream brings a rare kind of handcrafted detail to stealth adventure games, the kind that instantly grabs you with its illustrated storybook style and early 1900s industrial atmosphere. Buildings lean over cobblestone streets like old giants. Factory smokestacks cut the skyline, and every character moves with expressive animations that feel somewhere between stop motion and a theatrical performance. The world looks grounded but magical, grimy but inviting, like a folktale happening in a city that's just beginning to modernize. That unique aesthetic makes every alley and staircase a place worth exploring, even when danger lurks around every corner. The stealth itself leans heavily on timing, distraction tools, and environmental awareness. Guards have clearer patterns than most modern stealth games, turning each encounter into a puzzle rather than a trial-and-error loop. And the narrative lands surprisingly hard. This isn't a flashy AAA drama, but a personal story about family, class oppression, and the lengths people go when the world closes its doors. It feels intimate in the best way. But Eric Shome isn't perfect. The animations, while beautiful, can sometimes feel slower than the gameplay wants, making tight escapes more frustrating than tense. Pathfinding for enemies occasionally wobbles, and some players felt the difficulty curve spikes unexpectedly in the mid-game. There's also a certain indie stiffness in interactions, objects that don't quite collide right, or AI that forgets what it saw a little too quickly. Yet the game's identity is unmistakably strong. It's stylish without being derivative, emotional without being melodramatic, and mechanically clever without sacrificing atmosphere. Eric Shome is the kind of indie gem people rediscover years later and wonder how they missed it, a quiet standout for this year that deserves far more attention. All right, sliding into our underrated roundup is Stories from Seoul, The Gun Dog, a retro-style sci-fi visual novel/graphic adventure that quietly launched on February 20th. You step aboard the Jovian patrol ship JFS Gundog as a rookie security officer, haunted by a mech mishap that wiped out your squad. When a strange distress signal hits the edge of Jupiter's orbit, you roam richly detailed pixel corridors, interrogate a motley crew, solve light puzzles, and navigate branching dialogue that determines allegiances and who lives or dies. I had to include this one because it's criminally overlooked. Despite a very positive tag on Steam and an 80 on Metacritic, it slipped through launch week thanks to a stealthy marketing push. Pre-release demos at Steam Next Fest and Indie Tech showcases earned buzz for its era-accurate PC 98 aesthetic, complete with green screen options, 3 graphic modes, and a thumping chiptune score. Devs delayed an early Q4 2023 window to rebuild their engine, polish UI, and add a full-color mode. That extra polish paid off. Players rave over its razor-sharp pixel art, emotive character animations, and a surprisingly weighty narrative about paranoia, PTSD, and mutiny. Critics point to a sluggish first act, occasional pixel hunt puzzles, and a runtime that leaves you wanting more than one playthrough. This was meant to be an anthology, but Gundog's runaway success made it a standalone pilot for future entries. If you're craving a story-driven underdog that trusts you with real choices, immersive world building, and a dare-you-to-look-away mystery, Stories from Seoul, The Gundog is 2025's retro surprise you can't afford to miss. Just remember to save often. The fate of the crew depends on it. Routine is a minimalist sci-fi survival experience with an unexpectedly rich emotional core. Instead of relying on bombastic action or heavy exposition, it places you in a lonely, decaying colony where the rhythms of daily tasks are the only things standing between you and collapse. You manage oxygen levels, repair failing systems, and explore abandoned facilities while piecing together what happened through environmental storytelling. The world is painted in cool blues, harsh metallic grays, and quiet shadows. It's less about spectacle and more about mood. What makes Routine stand out is how it turns ordinary actions into narrative beats. Fixing a wiring panel becomes a moment of dread when you hear something move in the vents. Walking down a sterile hallway becomes tense when lights flicker out behind you. The game thrives on negative space, long stretches of quiet where your mind fills in what isn't shown. It's the kind of sci-fi that leans heavily on isolation, evoking classics like Moon and Alien, but filtered through a slow, indie sensibility. Of course, the deliberate pacing won't work for everyone. Some players found the long stretches of maintenance tasks too repetitive, especially when multiple systems break at once and require trekking back and forth across the base. A few mechanics feel underdeveloped, and the stealth elements can be clunky when danger finally appears. The story, while atmospheric, unfolds slowly and without traditional structure, which may leave some wishing for more explicit revelations. Still, routine succeeds because it understands the power of restraint. It doesn't oversell its mysteries or force action where it doesn't belong. Instead, it creates a heavy, lingering sense of dread built from silence, routine, and the fear that something is watching just out of sight. It's an indie gem for players who value mood, tension, and slow-burn sci-fi storytelling. Next on our list is Cabernet, the indie narrative RPG that quietly carved out a niche when it launched in February 2025. You step into the moonlit shoes of Liza, a young vampire wrestling with her dying humanity in a 2D Eastern European-inspired world packed with political intrigue, back-alley feedings, and moral crossroads at every turn. It's part visual novel, part point-and-click with a modern twist. Your keyboard doubles as a dialogue wheel, and every keystroke can lure a victim or spark an uneasy alliance. I couldn't skip Cabernet because it flies under most radars despite boasting one of the sweetest pixel palettes around and a branching story that actually respects your choices. Pre-launch demos at Steam Next Fest had folks buzzing over its dialogue system and the way art book details bleed into gameplay. Early reviews praised its build-your-own vampire approach and the subtle creep of its soundtrack. The devs rolled out hotfixes within days, smoothing UI quirks and tightening up the romance routes. Community sentiment has been very positive, with streamers delighted by the game's blend of gothic noir and wry humor. The stakes feel smaller, but more personal. Do you seduce a fellow immortal for intel, or spare them and risk exposure? If you love story-first indies that let you play storyteller and villain in one go, suit up for Cabernet. It's the underrated gothic twist of 2025 you never knew you needed. Constance is a somewhat emotionally haunting and deeply creative Metroidvania that blends fluid 2D platforming with emotional storytelling. It's an action platformer where you wield a giant paintbrush to fight enemies and traverse a decaying inner world representing the protagonist's mental health and burnout. The art style is vibrant and hand-drawn, shifting palettes to match the mood of each biome, from gloomy cyberpunk cities to floating, dreamlike islands. The gameplay revolves around paint-based mobility and combat. You use your brush to dash, attack, and interact with the environment, unlocking new techniques that open up previously inaccessible areas. Classic genre stuff, but executed with a buttery smooth feel similar to Hollow Knight or Celeste. The game balances intense boss fights with introspective narrative moments, using playable flashbacks to explore Constance's past as a violinist and her struggles with perfectionism. But the emotional ambition occasionally hampers the pacing. Some critics felt the narrative metaphors were a bit heavy-handed or unresolved, and while the gameplay is tight, it doesn't drastically reinvent the genre wheel. It's a comfort food Metroidvania, polished and beautiful, but familiar. Even with those caveats, Constance shines as a standout indie gem. It's imaginative, visually captivating, and built with a level of polish that makes moving through its world a joy. Next up is Blood Typer, the keyboard-only survival horror that snuck onto Steam on February and quietly earned a cult following. Explore a cursed film studio, typing words to move, pick up items, and even blast zombies. I had to include Blood Typers because it's the kind of bold indie that flies under most gamers' radars. Early trailers promised a mashup of Typing of the Dead's Bizarro keyboard combat and Resident Evil Outbreak's co-op dread. Once it dropped, streams lit up as people realized this wasn't a one-note gimmick, but a full-fledged survival horror with procedurally shuffled maps that keep each 30-minute run feeling fresh. Outer Brain Studios capped things off with the Scarlet Finale update, adding the last story mission, a public server browser, achievements, and quality-of-life tweaks like proper save slots and smoother voice chat. That said, it isn't perfect. Some characters' perks feel underwhelming. Save points can be sparse, and solo runs lean into frustration when 5 zombies surround you mid-spell. The difficulty spike around Chapter 3 turned a few streams into rage quits, yet it's an undeniable evolution from past typing titles. It trades typing of the Dead's on-rail simplicity for open levels, RPG-like character stats, and co-op insanity. Jotun Slayer. Hordes of Hell brings heavy metal Nordic chaos to the indie arena, delivering a fast-paced action experience wrapped in a bold, comic-inspired art style. Instead of leaning on realism, it embraces thick outlines with sharp contrasts and dramatic color splashes that make every frame look like a panel torn from a Viking graphic novel. Enemies explode into streaks of glowing runes, spell effects crackle with fiery intensity, and the environments, icy fjords, cursed forests, volcanic battlegrounds, feel like mythic battlegrounds painted with modern energy. Combat is where the game goes all in on style. Every swing of your weapon leaves stylized trails, and combos transition smoothly into finishing moves that feel equal parts brutal and theatrical. It's a power fantasy driven by speed, rhythm, and spectacle. The soundtrack pulses with thunderous drums and distorted guitars, pushing the pace forward as you carve through hordes. Bosses tower over you with outlandish designs, giants with glowing runic scars, demigods wreathed in flame, each one a visual feast. But that intensity can also overwhelm. The screen often fills with so many particle effects that clarity suffers, especially during late-game waves where enemies stack aggressively. Difficulty spikes appear suddenly, sometimes forcing players into grinding for materials to upgrade gear. The narrative, while intriguing, is delivered in quick, stylized vignettes that may leave lore-focused players wanting more depth. And performance dips have been noted during especially crowded encounters, though patches have steadily improved stability. Despite these flaws, Jotun Slayer stands out because it commits completely to its identity. It's loud, bold, and unapologetically over the top in the best way. The kind of game that feels like a myth retold through the lens of a heavy metal album cover. Indie action titles rarely look this confident, and even rarer still manage to back that style with genuinely fun gameplay. It earns its hidden gem status by being one thing above all, visually unforgettable. Scrabdackle is pure creative chaos in the best way possible. A hand-drawn, whimsical action-adventure that looks like it was sketched in the margins of a middle school notebook, then magically brought to life. The visual style is messy, expressive, and full of personality. Characters wobble as they move, enemies bounce around with goofy hostility, and environments shift between childlike silliness and surprisingly clever design. It's playful, imaginative, and instantly memorable. Gameplay combines exploration, spell slinging, and light RPG progression. The combat is snappy and fast, letting you mix spells, mobility tricks, and goofy improvised tactics that feel satisfying without being overly complex. Every area has its own charm. Talking fruit, haunted doodles, living geometry puzzles, and the writing strikes a balance between absurd comedy and genuine warmth. What makes it shine is how alive it feels. Characters react to your choices, environments respond to your spells, and the world constantly surprises you with clever interactions. However, its playful approach introduces a handful of rough edges. The looseness of the hand-drawn animation sometimes makes depth and distance harder to read in tight combat encounters. Some bosses lean heavily on chaos over clarity, which can feel unfair rather than challenging. The game's humor, while delightful for many, may feel too silly or minimalist for players expecting deeper narrative stakes. And though progression is fun, a few systems remain lightly developed compared to more traditional RPGs. Still, Scrabdackle succeeds because it embraces pure creativity with zero hesitation. It's charming, surprising, and packed with personality, a reminder that indie games don't need massive scope to be memorable. It's not trying to mimic anything else. It stands proudly as its own strange, joyful world. And in a landscape full of dark, serious titles, this playful energy feels like a breath of fresh, doodled air. Sol Sesto is one of 2025's most quietly brilliant releases. It dropped into early access on May 27th. You pick a hero, descend into a randomized dungeon, and every move is a gamble. Each row you choose lands you on one of 4 tiles, and that can mean treasure, traps, or a monster with a vendetta. It's like playing chess while blindfolded and occasionally being punched by the board. I included Sol Sesto because it's one of those games that looks simple on the surface but hides layers of tactical depth. The Cursed Teeth system is a standout. Stone teeth tweak your odds, metal ones trigger wild effects, and the whole thing feels like you're building a deck of probability modifiers. Add in magical fountain items, character-specific powers, and a roguelite progression system built around constellation upgrades, and you've got a game that rewards experimentation without overwhelming you. And players have been praising the art style. Think comic book surrealism meets dungeon grime. The clever enemy mechanics, and the way each run feels genuinely different. Early biomes lacked boss variety, and the final boss, being a Reskin, didn't exactly scream epic conclusion. Others flagged pacing issues, like slow coin dumping animations or underwhelming item incentives compared to permanent upgrades. But the devs have been patching fast, adding new characters, tweaking UI, and even teasing Steam Workshop support for custom dungeon layouts. If you're into games that turn randomness into a skill test, Sol Sesto is the indie roguelite you shouldn't sleep on. Bloodgrounds looks like a city builder at first glance, but it's actually a deep, turn-based tactical strategy game with roguelite elements. It's less about button mashing and more about managing a gladiator school in a fantasy world that blends Roman and Greek mythology. You are a patron recruiting fighters, equipping them with gear that visibly changes their pixel art sprites and sending them into the arena to fight for glory and your revenge against the Emperor. Visually, it thrives on cozy but detailed pixel art, where every helmet and sword is rendered with care. The gameplay loop is addictive. You draft a team of warriors, mages, and rangers, then command them on a grid-based battlefield. Positioning is everything. You need to leverage class synergies, use audience-thrown items like bandages, and complete dynamic side objectives mid-match. The stakes are high because permadeath is always on. If your star gladiator dies, they and their expensive gear are gone forever. For all its strategic depth, the game can be unforgiving. The management layer requires you to balance gold and injuries carefully, and a bad run of RNG in the arena can wipe out hours of progress. It's a game that demands patience and planning, not twitch reflexes. But if you love the idea of building a legacy and sweating over every tactical decision in the sand, Bloodgrounds offers a satisfyingly bloody chess match that you won't want to put down. Here's one of 2025's most chilling underdogs, Labyrinth of the Demon King. At first glance, it's a retro grimy dungeon crawler set in a demon-infested feudal Japan. You're the last survivor of a betrayed lord, armed with a half-broken katana and willful vengeance. But step inside its claustrophobic one-style corridors, and you'll find something more: tight stamina-driven combat, pulse-pounding stealth sections, and puzzles that thread back through the maze-like castle, sluggish movement, opaque map design, and a difficulty curve that spikes in mid-labyrinth. Solo dev even patched in performance fixes, trimmed respawn annoyances, and added more safe shrines in response to community feedback. One-person vision distilled into 15 to 20 hours of oppressive dread. Labyrinth of the Demon King dares to revivify PS1-era survival horror with modern mechanics, dynamic enemy AI, diverse weapon builds, and genuine tension that rarely lets up. It's the kind of indie title you'll either vow never to play again or obsessively replay, and savoring that grim sense of just one more run. All right, let's talk about Dolok Town, a side-scrolling, post-apocalyptic farming sim that quietly slipped into early access on May 8th. You play as Prody, a scavenger-turned-farmer, handed a poison plot in a ramshackle settlement made from old rail cars and ruined bridges. Grow crops, automate your homestead, befriend the townsfolk, and peel back the world's mysteries one acid rain season at a time. I had to include Dolok Town because it's the perfect underdog. Stunning pixel art that marries Stardew Valley charm with Fallout grit, layered over a side-scroller that actually lets you stack planters, build drones, and fight off mutated critters. They've patched in better UI scaling, added more safe shrines, and even teased a Steam Workshop roadmap after fans clamored for mods. The most recent hotfix fine-tuned performance on Steam Deck and introduced dialogue history. Players rave about the deep systems, vertical farming, dynamic weather threats, and a tech tree that turns your farm into a fully automated fortress. Lack of fast travel, occasional frame stutters and fog of war, and a tutorial that hands you a drone without much teaching. That mid-game backtracking can feel tedious, but the devs have promised more QL tweaks before full launch in early 2026. Dolok Town stand alone by weaving cozy slice-of-life beats into a gritty dystopian rhythm. If you're craving a farming sim that dares to make you sweat through acid storms and celebrate a perfectly timed harvest, Dolok Town is the hidden indie gem you gotta play. Mycopunk is one of the strangest, most visually striking indies of 2025, and it deserves more attention. Instead of neon skylines and chrome, it imagines a world where biotech and fungi have fused into something organic and unsettling. Bioluminescent spores drift like dust, architecture pulses with vein-like patterns, and machinery looks grown rather than built. Walking its zones feels like exploring a living organism that reacts to you, with environments that shift and breathe as you move through them. Crucially, it's an online co-op game. You and your friends explore shifting areas, tackle shared objectives, and combine tools to manipulate living tech and fungal ecosystems. Much of the game's value comes from those emergent moments, unexpected events, group improvisation, and the small stories that form when players experiment together. Mechanically, the loop centers on co-op exploration and resource sharing, scavenging biotech scraps, spore-like clusters, and living components as a group to craft and evolve gear that behaves more symbiotically than mechanical. Combat and gadgets are intentionally unpredictable. Weapons can mutate or behave differently depending on the environment and the session, so coordination and improvisation often matter more than pure twitch skill. That unpredictability can make encounters feel tense and memorable, especially when a team figures out a clever combo or adapts on the fly. There are trade-offs. The systems can feel opaque at first. The UI leans intentionally organic and takes time to learn, and performance can dip in dense areas where particle effects and dynamic systems pile up. If you want a tight, solo narrative or a fast-paced shooter, this isn't the game for you. But if you enjoy cooperative discovery, creative problem-solving, and a world that feels alive and strange, Mycopunk's bold, fungal aesthetic and co-op first design make it a standout hidden gem from the second half of 2025. Next up on our underrated radar is S4U, a lo-fi visual novel with a twist that quietly launched on Steam January 9th. You slip into the shoes of Mickey, an architect by day and a hired online mouthpiece by night. Rather than mindlessly clicking through text, you actually type your replies in real time across multiple chat windows, juggling work deadlines, side gig crises, and even budding romances under the neon haze of Castor Yard. This one made my list because it's the kind of indie narrative gem that screams cult hit, yet most people slept on it. Over 40 richly written characters, branching storylines, and a soundtrack that grooves to every emotional beat. It's immersive typing mechanic, relatable slice-of-life beats, and that electric tension when your boss, your best friend, and a cheeky AI all ping at once. It reinvents the visual novel formula by turning typing into gameplay and threading real stakes through every keystroke. Trading one-note NPC gags for actual character moments makes the humor land harder and the world feel surprisingly alive. If you've ever lost yourself in late-night chat rooms, yearn for a storytelling experience that trusts you to carry the pace, and want a stealth indie hit that plays like a living chat log, Fisher's Fishing Journey sounds like a simple fishing idle adventure at first glance, and it is. But it's also surprisingly stylish, and unexpectedly addictive. The game uses 2D art with a soft color palette mixed with subtle lighting effects that make every lake, river, and coastal village feel handcrafted. Reflections shimmer gently on the water, reeds sway with almost meditative rhythm, and the game somehow captures the quiet loneliness of early morning fishing in a way that feels nostalgic even if you've never held a fishing rod in your life. The cool thing about this is you can set the game as a wallpaper and see the little cat guy fishing in the background. It's sort of a digital companion you have while you're on your PC, like the paperclip guy in Microsoft Word. You can collect fishes and showcase them in a fish tank. You'll sometimes have other characters come and talk to you, which is this game's way of delivering a narrative. But there's a lack of variety in side activities, and a few players wish for more mechanical depth in the late game. And while its story tidbits land well for what it is, they're not substantial, meaning players looking for something more tangible may not find it. Still, Fisher's fishing journey shines because it knows what it wants to be, a quiet, heartfelt experience wrapped in a peaceful vibe. It's an indie gem that innovates by slightly adding to a type of game that has been done 100 times before. No Skin is one of those indie horror roguelikes that feels like it crawled out of a cursed VHS tape and into your Steam library. You play as Noir, a girl accused by a skinless entity of stealing his flesh. He gives you a few items and then yeets you into a surreal nightmare house filled with cultists, stitched-up friends, and enemies that explode just to spite you. It's part psychological horror, part turn-based strategy, and the community's been dissecting its lore like it's a From Software title. The game's experimental art style mixes pixel characters with real-world photo backgrounds, and it somehow works. The combat's deceptively deep, with status effects, item synergies, and a faith-level system that cranks up difficulty modifiers like reduced healing and enemies starting with shields. It's got that Slay the Spire energy, but filtered through a Junji Ito lens. Love the atmosphere, the replayability, and the sheer amount of secrets. Alternate endings, and even a hidden boss fight with the dev himself if you reach 148% skin recovery. It's weird, it's bold, and it's exactly the kind of indie gem that deserves more love. The Wandering Village continues to stand out because it does what most city builders never dare to try. It puts your entire civilization on the back of a colossal, wandering creature. The world isn't just a backdrop. It's alive, moving, breathing, and occasionally ignoring your desperate attempts to keep your people alive. The art direction blends soft, painterly landscapes with a strange, almost serene post-apocalyptic tone, where poisonous spores drift in the air and lush forests return between dangerous biomes. As Onbu stomps across the world, the scenery shifts beneath your feet. Deserts, ruins, toxic valleys, creating a constant visual and mechanical rhythm that feels unlike anything in the genre. But the real charm comes from how your choices affect the creature itself. You can build into its skin or respect its space, feed it or exploit it, listen to its needs or ignore them in a scramble for short-term survival. That relationship gives the game an emotional core missing from most management sims. It's not without issues. The pace can slow to a crawl during long travel segments, and advanced players sometimes feel the systems could be deeper. Early versions occasionally struggle with balance, making certain runs feel overly punishing or strangely easy depending on biome roles. Still, The Wandering Village is one of those indie games where the concept alone is enough to hook you, and the execution lands far more often than it misses. It's cozy, stressful, beautiful, and melancholy all at once. If you want a management game that feels personal, even spiritual at times, this remains one of the most distinctive hidden gems of 2025. Let's talk about Mudborn, Frog Management Sim, the game that asks the age-old question: what if you woke up from hibernation and your pond was absolutely wrecked? And also, you were a frog? Released on March 20th, World Frog Day, this cozy but chaotic nature sim from Teen Engineers lets you breed frogs, cultivate mushrooms, and restore a broken ecosystem using the power of genetics and a whole lot of slimy charm. I included Mudborn because it's the kind of indie that quietly hops into early access and then refuses to leave your brain. Frogs with tiny hats, mushroom modifiers that mess with DNA, and puzzles that require actual algebra. Mudborne dives into generational puzzles and trait-based breeding. The game even lets you hop between dream realms to solve puzzles and unlock new frog species. Some folks found the early game a bit punishing, especially when breeding requirements get math-heavy, and the UI can be finicky when placing objects near plants. But the devs have been patching fast, adding QL tweaks, new frog furniture, and even Steam Workshop support. If you're into cozy Sims with a weird edge, Mudborne is the amphibious underdog of 2025 you need to play. Just be ready to drug some frog babies and do algebra. You've been warned. All right, picture FTL stripped of its neon polish and dunked in grimdark cathedral blood. Welcome to Void War. It soft launched on June 2nd. No fuel bars here. Every sector's a branching path, so you're always deciding between cultist shrines, pirate ambushes, or trading grim artifacts. I dropped it on this underrated list because while everyone chases the next Souls-like, Void War quietly hooked a cult with its boarding-first combat. You deck out psychers, necromancers, and cyborg zealots, then hurl them through pods like living torpedoes. If you lose a run, you keep the gear, so even defeats feel like progress. Popular sentiment painted it as FTL meets Warhammer 40k. And yeah, that's exactly what you get. Gothic ships, skull-strewn decks, and techno-magical rituals. Post-launch, players rave about the feral synergy builds and brutal torments mode. Though there's some issues like tiny UI icons, cluttered tooltips, and the occasional crash during massive boarding melees. Whether you're farming bone-throwing dervishes or smashing protocols with psychic bolts, Void War has carved its niche and climbs right up my must-play list. Sleep Awake is one of the most unsettling indie releases this year. Not because it leans on cheap scares or loud horror tropes, but because it weaponizes ambiguity, repetition, and surreal imagery to create a dream logic experience you can't shake off. The world feels like a half-remembered nightmare. Dim hallways that loop into new shapes, familiar rooms that subtly change each time you enter, and distorted figures who speak in riddles or whisper fragments of forgotten conversations. It uses a grainy visual style and soft focus textures that make everything look like footage recovered from a corrupted memory, which only deepens the unease. Gameplay revolves around navigating shifting environments where the rules keep changing. Doors disappear, lights flicker in patterns that hint at codes, and interactive objects react differently depending on your previous choices or your mental state, which the game quietly tracks. What stands out is how it blurs the line between exploration and psychological narrative. Every area feels symbolic. Every puzzle feels like a metaphor, and every moment of silence carries tension. It's a horror game that wants to disorient, not simply frighten. However, that same creative direction brings inevitable caveats. The game's dream logic can feel cryptic to the point of frustration. Some puzzles rely heavily on interpretation rather than clear feedback, leaving players unsure whether they're making progress or wandering in circles. The pacing is intentionally slow, which might alienate those expecting more action-driven horror. And while the narrative is rich in subtext, it reveals very little directly, meaning players seeking clean answers may feel unsatisfied by its abstract resolution. But for those who love atmospheric indie horror, the kind that aims for your subconscious instead of your adrenaline, Sleep Awake is a standout gem. It's artistic, eerie, and emotionally heavy in a way that lingers long after you close the game. It proves that horror doesn't need monsters chasing you to be terrifying. Sometimes, the most frightening thing is being left alone with your own mind. Next on our list is Doll's Nest. Nitroplus's leap from visual novels into full-blown mecha-girl action, quietly emerging in spring 2025 after a last-minute delay to polish the Unreal Engine build. You drop into the colossal, crater-like world of Hod as a customizable frame unit, scavenging parts, managing a shared energy pool for dodges and weapon swings, and unraveling the eerie mysteries buried in its industrial ruins. Think Nier, Automata's tension crossed with Armored Core's build crafting, all wrapped in brutalist voxel art that Game 8 called hauntingly beautiful and worth the price alone. I had to feature Doll's Nest because it flew under most gamers' radars despite earning a solid, very positive stamp on Steam. Post-release patches have already smoothed crashes, fixed disappearing story items, and teased new NPCs in Steam update notes. Players rave about the depth of customization, choosing frames, limbs, weapons, and modules to suit every shard drain boss fight, plus the slow burn storytelling through environmental lore and a moody soundtrack. Critics, however, point to giant maps with zero hand-holding, inconsistent onboarding, and some stutters on mid-range rigs. Here, they traded taboo themes for tactical shooting. By the weekend, you can blaze through its dozen zones, cherry-pick rare parts, and still crave more thanks to multiple endings and a post-game challenge, likely coming in DLC. If you've ever wanted to build the perfect mech waifu, flirt with despair in a silent factory, then barricade yourself against the next creeping horror, Doll's Nest is the hidden indie gem of 2025 you shouldn't miss. Morta is one of the bleakest, most artistically confident indie releases of 2025. A game that blends grim folklore, surreal horror, and narrative-driven exploration into something that feels more like a descent than an adventure. Its world is carved from sharp shadows and muted earth tones, with hand-painted environments that look like illustrations ripped from an old, forbidden storybook. Weathered stone, skeletal trees, and broken sanctuaries fill the landscape, each area feeling like it holds a secret you're not sure you want to uncover. It's beautiful in a way that feels wrong, which is exactly the point. At its core, it's about wandering through a land that no longer belongs to the living. You solve cryptic environmental puzzles, decipher strange rituals, and interact with characters who seem half aware of their own despair. Every line of dialogue has this heavy, symbolic weight, hinting at sins, bargains, and tragedies buried beneath generations of fear. The combat is minimalistic but punishing. Every encounter feels like a judgment, not a fight. Timing matters more than equipment, and even winning feels like you only delayed something inevitable. Of course, this kind of artistic ambition comes with drawbacks. The pacing is intentionally oppressive, which some players found overwhelming in extended sessions. Clues aren't always clear, leading to moments of wandering where you're unsure if you missed something or if the game wants you to feel lost. A few reviewers pointed out difficulty spikes that feel uneven, more like trials of patience than tests of skill. And because the narrative leans so heavily on symbolism, some players may finish the game feeling like they grasped the mood, but not the meaning. Still, Morta stands out because it doesn't compromise. It's a deeply atmospheric experience that rewards players willing to sink into its suffocating tone and interpret its story on their own terms. It's the kind of hidden gem that sparks discussion long after the credits roll. A somber reminder that indie games can still feel bold, poetic, and genuinely unsettling. Alright, let's slide into Metal Bringer, the voxel pixel roguelike action surprise that quietly blasted on Steam in March 2025. You play Surya, a girl thawed from cryosleep a millennium after humanity buried itself underground, and you're tasked with building androids called Labor. Why is it on this underrated list? Because despite glowing, very positive tags on Steam, Metal Bringer never got the spotlight it deserved. Most folks never even saw the trailer. Once the game went live, the community buzz spread through word of mouth. Players couldn't stop talking about how satisfying it feels to mix and match mech limbs on the fly, or nail a perfectly timed grappling hook dodge when a laser wall closes in. Some called out the steep learning curve in the early floors and a vague onboarding that dumped you into combat. The devs listened. A pre-launch patch bolstered tutorials, smoothed UI elements, and even added small story beats in the first zone to give Surya a bit more personality. ARM critics point to a short post-game, an unbalanced difficulty spike around mid-runs, an itch for more late-game floors. If you're into mech customization, tight roguelike loops, and a soundtrack that pulses with every enemy shatter, Metal Bringer is the hidden gem of 2025 you need to suit up for. Alright, let's talk about Jump King Quest, the audacious title that dropped into Steam Early Access earlier this year on February 12th. and somehow snuck under most radars. On paper, it's still that merciless vertical climb, momentum-based jumps, Pit of Doom resets, but Nexile grafted on RPG-light stats, soul-style combat, and a sprawling world called the Heights. You're not just chasing this smoking hot babe at the top anymore. You've got weapons to swing, armor to upgrade, and parrying to master. And yes, it finally added online co-op and PvP, so friends can save you or send you plummeting back to square one. I threw this one onto the list because it's criminally underrated. Despite earning a very positive tag on Steam, early buzz came from a January playtest and was praised for the game's sheer ambition. Dynamic multiplayer, build customization, hidden shortcuts woven into every pixel, and over a dozen unique zones. The dopamine rush when you parry a Frog Knight in midair and nail that next jump is great. Of course, it hasn't been flawless. The move from pure platforming to full-blown combat rubbed purists the wrong way. Had to patch clunky UI, balance overpowered stats, and smooth out netcode spikes in PvP. Community threads buzz with people missing the cozy fairy tale vibe. Compared to the original Jump King, this is a whole different beast. The first game was a solo climb with zero handholding. Here, you earn XP, unlock new starter classes, and swap gear mid-run. You trade pure tension for tactical depth. Looking ahead, Nexile's got a Phantom 1.0 update plan for late 2025 to wrap up Act 1, add new bosses, and give a game an ending. Until then, Jump King Quest remains a cult favorite,